What if I told you that Lee's surrender at Appomattox, the moment widely regarded as the Civil War's end, was actually just the start of a much more complex and darker saga? A tale involving secret negotiations, desperate choices, and a conflict that didn't truly conclude when everyone believes it did. What if the famous handshake between Lee and Grant symbolized not defeat alone, but survival, symbolism, and a precarious hope for peace? In the next few minutes, I will reveal startling truths that official history books won't share, truths that will upend everything you thought you knew about the Confederacy's final days. Don't look away, because what occurred at Appomattox was merely the surface. But before we dive in, please like and subscribe to our channel to support this community. General Robert E. Lee once declared he would rather face 1,000 deaths than surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. For years, he embodied Confederate resilience, a brilliant commander who led through some of the Civil War's most famous battles like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Chancellorsville. His resolve seemed unbreakable, but by early April 1865, circumstances had changed dramatically. After nearly 10 months of brutal trench warfare around Petersburg and Richmond, Union forces under Grant finally broke the Confederate defenses at Five Forks on April 2nd. This forced Lee to abandon the two cities which were the Confederacy's heart and retreat west with his exhausted and starving army. The withdrawal was utterly harrowing. On April 5th, Lee reached Amelia Courthouse, hoping to find desperately needed supplies. However, none were available. His men were famished, demoralized, and relentlessly pursued by Union cavalry under General Philip Sheridan. Then, on April 6th, at Sailor's Creek, nearly a quarter of Lee's forces were killed or captured in one devastating battle. Lee reportedly exclaimed, "My God, has the army been broken?" By April 8th, it was clear escape was impossible. Union troops had blocked Lee's path at Appomattox Station and seized essential supplies. Surrounded on all sides, without reinforcements or a route of retreat, Lee made the grave decision to meet with Grant and negotiate terms of surrender. Though he had vowed never to surrender, Lee chose pragmatism over pride. He recognized that continuing the war would only cause needless deaths and suffering, not only to his soldiers, but also to Southern civilians who had endured 4 years of devastation. During this moment of crisis, one of Lee's closest commanders, James Longstreet, deeply influenced his choice. Longstreet, a clear-headed realist who had stood beside Lee throughout the war, accepted by early April that further resistance was futile. The Army of Northern Virginia was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and critically short on supplies. On April 9th at Appomattox Station, General John B. Gordon reported his corps was completely worn out after a fierce fight with Union cavalry blocking their westward escape. Seeing no chance of breakthrough or support, Longstreet advised Lee that surrender was their only viable option. However, not all officers agreed. Brigadier General Edward Porter Alexander proposed breaking the army into smaller groups to wage guerrilla warfare, hoping to prolong the fight indefinitely. Yet, both Longstreet and Lee rejected this plan outright. Longstreet's stance in these concluding days reflected his wartime philosophy, making pragmatic decisions to spare needless suffering, even if it meant defeat. Historians debate whether Lee's surrender at Appomattox was deliberately orchestrated, not fake, but a carefully arranged event symbolizing reconciliation. Consider this. Grant offered exceptionally generous terms to Lee's army. Confederate soldiers were allowed to return home after disarming. Officers could keep sidearms and personal horses, and no prosecutions would follow as long as paroles were honored. Grant also provided rations for Lee's starving men, 25,000 meals total. These terms were not only practical, but deeply symbolic. By permitting Confederate soldiers to keep horses for farming and return home with dignity, Grant fostered a spirit of healing rather than retribution. This approach wasn't solely Grant's decision. It reflected President Abraham Lincoln's desire for a peaceful reunification of North and South. Even the location of surrender, Wilmer McLean's house, carried symbolism. McLean had moved there after his previous home near Bull Run was damaged in one of the war's earliest battles in 1861. Now, 4 years later, fate had placed him again at the epicenter of history as the war ended beneath his roof. Was this coincidence, or was it intentionally planned? Though the full truth remains uncertain, it's clear Appomattox was more than a military loss. It stood as a symbol of national restoration. Although Appomattox was pivotal, it did not end the Confederacy right away. Lee surrendered only his Army of Northern Virginia, not all Confederate forces throughout the South. Other Confederate armies remained active across wide areas. General Joseph E. Johnston commanded tens of thousands in North Carolina until his April 26th surrender after talks with General Sherman, weeks after Appomattox. Lieutenant General Richard Taylor kept fighting in Alabama and Mississippi until May 4th, capitulating only after Johnston's surrender. West of the Mississippi, Lieutenant General Edmund Kirby Smith held out longer, surrendering May 26th in Galveston, Texas. In what's now Oklahoma, Brigadier General Stand Watie, a Cherokee leader commanding Native American troops, remained defiant until June 23rd, the last Confederate general to surrender. Meanwhile, Confederate President Jefferson Davis refused to acknowledge defeat after fleeing Richmond on April 2nd. Arrested on May 10th near Irwinville, Georgia, Davis hoped guerrilla warfare might revive Southern independence hopes, a belief shared by some commanders who fought into mid-1865. Though April 9, 1865 is often seen as the Civil War's symbolic end, the reality was far more complicated. Lee's surrender at Appomattox ended only his army, while other Confederate forces battled on for weeks and months after. It wasn't until August 20, 1866, over 16 months later, that President Andrew Johnson officially declared the war's end. This prolonged timeline stemmed from slow communication, scattered Confederate resistance, ongoing clashes, and political delays, all evidence of how deeply divided the nation remained after Lee's surrender. In 1865, news traveled slowly and unreliably compared to today. Word of Lee's surrender on April 9th took days or even weeks to reach scattered Confederate commanders across vast areas. Without confirmation of Lee's capitulation or Richmond's fall, many generals kept fighting, believing their cause was still alive. Appomattox is remembered as when fighting stopped and healing began. Yet, as we have uncovered, that was only part of the story. Lee's surrender didn't end the Confederacy nor instantly bring peace. It was a symbolic act, a gesture of honor and reconciliation. So, was Lee's surrender truly the Confederacy's end, or a carefully staged moment to rewrite history and make way for fragile peace? How did hidden motives, rivalries, and politics shape that fateful handshake? And what of the Confederate armies that continued fighting long after the world thought the war was over? Were they heroes, villains, or something in between? History often paints in broad strokes, but the real story hides in shadows and silence. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you believe was really happening behind those closed doors at Appomattox? Could the surrender have been more than a military act? Share your thoughts, theories, and questions in the comments below. Because Lee's surrender story is far from over, and your voice might uncover the next hidden truth.